Welcome to the Talking Toughness series of podcasts, where we examine the mental toughness concept with guests from a wide range of sectors, illustrating that our mental approach to what happens to us and around us matters for all of us. Our guests come from the worlds of business and public service, education, social mobility, sport, and health. They all share their experiences and their observations about the factors that have enabled them to survive and to thrive on their journey through life. Many guests have gone further and incorporated the concept into what they do as coaches, trainers, managers, and leaders, helping others to thrive in their turn. Their experiences are valuable to those of us who strive to do the same.
I'm interested in, where people talk about terms and stuff like that, and I see, I see other things out there. People talk about, I don't know, agility or mental fitness or whatever, whatever other terms are there. Psychological safety seems really big at the moment and stuff.
Mm.
Um, as a practitioner, to how do you manage that kind of like people jump on sort of faddy kind of terms and they get quite wedded to them. So like how do you kind of manage that in a practice from a practitioner point of view?
For me, it's around getting to understand what it means to them or what they think it means. So it goes back to a comment you said a few minutes ago, I think, John, about meeting them where they are. I think that's something else. So I think it goes, I always come back on to, well, what do you mean by psychological safety? What do you mean by mental fitness? How does that show up for you? What's going on? That's interesting. And then I'll try and keep subtly relaying it back to the model of mental toughness that we work with, so they can start to see. So rather than going, no, you're wrong, or it's this, start to help them see how it maps across. And I find that works fairly well. But I always start with, what do you mean? Because I think even the term, mental toughness has different meanings for different people. So
Yeah.
it's always about trying to meet them where they are and then subtly trying to see how it links across. Oh, that's interesting. That sounds to me a bit more like mindset. Okay, well, so tell me about risk or whatever, and start to keep relaying it back that way. Or I'll
Yeah.
start to see, in terms of psychological safety is, okay, yeah, it's really important. Where do you think you are? Actually, if you have lots of people that are really mentally tough, how do you think that might impact on psychological safety levels in your organization? Or what if you've got people that are mentally tough at one end of the spectrum and we've got others that are a bit more mentally sensitive? Crikey, the impacts on psychological safety could be quite big, couldn't it? And then they start to see how actually it's quite useful. So that's how I kind of deal with it.
Yeah. That sounds really sound because I I'm always kind of struck by how often terms arrive and uh, I I'm always interested. I think the job of a sort of researcher psychologist sometimes is to sort of identify something that exists, but be able to sort of operationalize it, explain it, measure it, see if you can change it, that kind of stuff. Sometimes it feels like uh, people introduce something that they go, this would be a good commodity or product. How can I tell people this is what you want? Rather than going, here's this thing that everyone intuitively knows exists. Well, we've figured out how you sort of conceptualize it and measure it. And that's why I'm always sort of, again, as a sort of someone who just sets foot in the practitioner world every now and then, dip my toe in. I'm always kind of amazed by the genesis of so many things that get spoken about in businesses.
Yeah, and it's funny, you look at different models. There's all sorts of different models, but some of the models that are really popular have no basis in research. So I think Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, if I'm understanding, doesn't actually have any. It's not underpinned by any real research, is it? It's it's a great model. I think it makes sense. It's intuitive, and therefore it's been brilliantly marketed through a story. I've read his book. It's a great story, and that perpetuates it. So I think some of those models are just well marketed, and I think if they're easy to do, then and easy to get hold of, then they kind of get a groundswell of opinion. It's I think sometimes it's also down to that social proof bit. Definitely, if enough people are doing it, then people will go with what other people are doing. That's why some of the other ones are really big, because people just get lazy. Or everyone else is using this, so I'll use that as well. And I think it's for newer concept. It's not new, is it? But this concept of mental toughness that you guys have created. How do we get that to the stage where everyone's starting to go, actually, this is what we really need to use? Because not only is it understandable what it's used, but it's really based on research, sound psychological principles. It's been peer reviewed. How do we get it to that stage so it can really have the impact that we know it can have? That's the challenge now.
Absolutely. And I'm interested as well in kind of, because you're very experienced as a coach, and I know a lot of coaches listen to the podcast, and how accessible do you think kind of understanding of evidence-based practice and knowing what is good quality, how accessible is that to coaches? Because in the academic world, we're rewarded for producing things that sit behind a paywall and are written in really inaccessible language anyway. So I just wonder, from a coach's perspective, like, how easy is it to really know what is snake oil versus good evidence base?
In one word, tough.
Yeah, good word.
I think tough, because I think the brilliantly marketed popular products just win out, and unless you are a coach that really is interested in the psychology and the underpinnings for stuff, where do you go to find an alternative view? Where do you go to get the unbiased view of? And I'm being honest, I think perhaps the British Psychological Society and other psychological societies probably have a duty of care, might be strong, I don't know, but I think they have a requirement to evaluate some of these things, or at least make it easy for people to understand and find somewhere independent to go, this is this tool and how it's rated, and this is this tool and how it's rated, and that's very valid, and that not so much. But so at least people can have an objective understanding of, and then make an informed choice about where to go.
It's a great point, because that sort of evidence to practice gap exists. And you think, well, whose responsibility is it to kind of try and bridge that? And perhaps those kind of like professional bodies, like say, we should maybe put a bit of pressure on them. Professional bodies, which, by the way, practitioners and academics can both join and become part
absolutely.
of.
I'm not sort of knocking them per se. I think it's important. I think if you really are serious about it, it's important to join and do the research. But I would think, anyone coach listening to this, is do your own research. Don't just go with the common ones because that's what everybody else does, or you think that's what clients are wanting. Go with the ones that, if it's really important to you, go and do your own research and find the ones that are really valid.
Looping back to your expertise on communications, and you've got a great deal of expertise there, Anthony. We are flooded by information. So, you and I are kind of LinkedIn freaks. We go on it quite a lot. I see so much stuff there, and it's just coming down, and it looks pucker, it looks like the real thing. And I guess most people don't know how to differentiate. Last night, I was actually talking to somebody about intrinsic motivation and its relationship with mental toughness.
Mm.
And when I explained what intrinsic motivation was, she said, "Oh, that's Daniel Pink's theory, isn't it?" No.
For the
Yeah.
benefit of the tape, I'm just
Yeah, well, he's written a best-selling book.
rubbing
Give him his due.
rubbing
He's
my head there.
popularised an idea, but
Yeah,
Yeah. It
but
was
I'd
started way
say,
before that, wasn't it?
yeah, well,
sorry.
Edward Deci in 1971 was doing a ton of work on intrinsic motivation.
Yes.
Good work, published in top quality journals, you know.
Well, it's like, I mean, in our world, Cabasa is the forgotten heroine, isn't she?
Yeah. But I think you've just that's a great, just what we talked about, Doug, just something that, everyone thinks, intrinsic motivation, whatever, it's Daniel Pink. And it's no, he's standing on the shoulders of giants that have gone decades before him. And all he's done is repackaged it in such a way and sold it into the masses brilliantly.
It's more like picking the pockets of giants.
Picking the pockets of giants.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, Nate. Look, maybe he's brilliant at what he does. I had an email from someone yesterday that mentioned it, and I had to Google him because I'd never heard of him.
Daniel Pink.
He's not known in academic.
Yes,
I remember, Doug, when we were in we were in like Sydney or something before, I think, a bunch of coaches in a room, and someone mentioned the who was it who wrote that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective?
Yeah, Covey.
Yeah, Stephen Covey.
He's unknown in academia. Covey. Nobody knows him. Yeah.
And someone mentioned about Covey, and I went, who? Like, and I said that, I was like, I mean, I was head of a psych department at the time, and I said, if I went back to my department, the psychology department in the university, and said, who's heard of this guy? No one would. And that room gasped. I think they just thought he must be some legendary psychologist or whatever. And look, I don't know. Maybe he's a very good writer or journalist or whatever.
There's a common theme, I think. It's the ability to have a model that people can see and grasp. So Lencioni, Stephen, put it in a visual representation that people can grasp. So great that we've got a really accessible model with the 4 C's. But then how do you tell stories around it? So going back to your point, John, he's just a really good storyteller and structured this book, and people bought into it. And then it just becomes self-perpetuating. But the rigor, the science behind it isn't there. But it's, can you package and market things really well?
Do you notice a difference? I'm going to say I do. When we're working these days with larger and larger organizations, they're more likely to have competent, knowledgeable people at the top who would have heard of Deci and Ryan. Whereas if you're working in the SME world, you are very unlikely to find people who've got that, that kind of background. No, they might have an HR professional, but that might have started out as an HR clerk and done a moderate qualification. It's sort of given them the basics, but not much more than that. Do you find that?
I do. And I think, thinking about the HR world, the smaller SME world, they're more likely to have come across the mass marketed Stephen Covey models, Patrick Lencioni's, than they are the ones that come from the more rigorous academic research backed ones. And that's our challenge, I think, really, is to how do we build on the rigor that you guys have created with this model and Peter Clough and everything that got there, and how do we now get this out there to the mass market? How do we communicate that in a way that shows that we've got that ability with the integrity of the model and the research? Yeah, so that's the challenge, and I kind of use stories for it. So the more stories I can use, the more I build up a database of working either with individuals or teams bigger and larger. Then I think that case study way is a great way to kind of get the message across.
Well, of course, we kind of use our own stories now because we talk a lot about the integrity of what we do. We talk a lot about the research behind it. Well, I mean, I think we're now well in excess of 250 different peer-reviewed academic papers. So, even mentioning that, you will get questions from people saying, "What's a peer review?"
Yeah.
So when you can't just say something; you have to have your peers, other experts, say, "Yes, it makes sense. You don't get that in your world, but the stuff that you use comes out of that world. So,
and that's, I kind of see myself as a sort of a pracademic with a focus on the practical. It's how do I take the research, the work that you guys have done, the rigor, and convert that into a language that other people that can use. How can I bridge that gap between, you just said there, you've got 250 peer-reviewed papers, and people look at you blankly. What does that mean? Because they don't sit in that world. So how do I take that in a way and sell that in, or help them understand what that means in a language that they understand?
It requires a degree of mental toughness to keep ploughing that furrow, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It's that, I mean, I've been at it now since 2015. I think I'll be honest, the first 2 or 3 years were quite tough. I don't think I really got to grips with the model as well as I might have done now, or learning how it can evolve and how we can use it in so many different ways. It's much easier to be able to do that. But at first you're sort of speaking to people and they were just blank faces back at you, or no, I really disagree, and they get quite vociferous about it because they'd have a reaction to that term that we talked about. How you guys have stuck at it for so long, hats off to you, Doug.
Well, I admire your coping mechanism. I never thought of picking up a wife along the way to support me.
That's a different story.
I always saw Doug as a Cilla Black kind of character, the matchmaker, right? So I just wanted to ask a bit. You mentioned stories there, Anthony, and you mentioned the mental toughness metaphors book earlier on, which, hey, a scan of Amazon tells me it's a must read. Okay, so let's take that as a directive. Could you just explain to us a little bit more about what's in there? What defines a sort of a metaphor? Is it various stories, or
so there's just a collection of 20 short stories. Some are fictional, some are things that other people might go, oh yeah, sort of seen that. Some are based on actual events. So there's one story around a brief part of an interview with Boris Becker, and I just talk about, it's a short paragraph of a longer interview, but I talk about how mental toughness applies to that and how it relates to the 4 C's, and so that's how we take it. There's some classic metaphors. There's one which is a great one for salespeople around the 2 crocodiles, the old crocodile and the young crocodile, and the young crocodile's full of energy and goes rushing off, thrashing around, exerting tons of energy trying to catch things, and the old crocodile just sort of sits there very quietly, not doing much. But then when he does it powerfully and explosively and grabs a big kill. And so there's just the metaphor there about, again, and how they relate to each of the 4 C's. And then what I also do is give 3 or 4 takeaways on the story, my takeaways as they relate to the concept of mental toughness and us and human beings, and then 3 or 4 questions to reflect on. And I think a lot of people have said they've really enjoyed it. I know a few people said they've sat down with their family, and certainly with kids that are maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that kind of age, read out a short story, because they're all relatable, relevant for children. There's nothing in there that isn't. And then had a discussion around, what does the story mean, and those kind of things. So so that's the book in a nutshell, and it really was designed to make the concept of mental toughness and the 4 C's model approachable at all levels, so you could give it to kids that can read, and there's nothing in there that would upset them or get them to start to think about it.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
After 10 years, you've got a lot of experience, a lot of expertise. You've got a couple of really good models tucked under your belt. As I don't do so much delivery with clients anymore, but I do have a picture of what's right and what's wrong and what's missing in organizations generally. If you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you would try to put right for everyone?
one thing you put right for everybody in any organization, or what if I'm thinking about?
Well, you can take it any way you want. I mean, I'll give you an indication. For me, leadership is a big issue, and I think I can't remember who said it. Somebody said it really well. Said with leadership, we often think we do leadership to other people. We don't. A leader can only create the conditions for other people to thrive.
Yes.
And people don't understand that. You still do qualifications in leadership, and it's all about this is what you do, this is what you do, this is how you impact on people. It's the creating the conditions bit that's or the environment bit that for me is missing.
Yeah.
But that's a nebulous thing, and it's quite hard to get that over to people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is the real challenge. I think I was really lucky growing up as a child. I had a dad who was a doctor, and my mum was a nurse. And Dad always used to instill in me. He said, "Look, if you listen to a patient long enough and ask the right questions, they'll tell you what's wrong with them." And we have, as Joe and I, as you know, my wife's a coach as well, and we have a saying which is, in coaching the client, the problem the client brings you is never the problem. So I think going back to your quite broad question, I think if I was speaking, one thing could fix things, it would be working with HR, L&D teams, organizational teams to really start to get to the nub of what actually is the problem or the challenge here. And it's not what they often think it is. And then to create solutions that are really tailored. It's why I don't do off-the-shelf programs, because they're just, what off-the-shelf programs, put a bunch of models together in a workbook, talk about them. That's not going to change behavior. That's not going to change things. So it's really understanding what's going on for that individual, that group of people, using the right kind of tools, like the mental toughness tool or the ILM 72, which I think is great, because and understanding how are people thinking, because when you change how they think, then you can change what they do. And so I think that's hard. So I really unpick, but really curious about what's really going on. What are the behaviors that we need to see, seeing that we don't want? What are the thinking patterns that we're trying to really change, and work to change those? Don't just wheel in a shiny product that has been sold well. I think really trying to understand what's the real problem. I just think people don't ask the right questions. They're not curious enough.
Okay. I mean, I saw an article last week, and it was by a reputable organisation that said that in the UK, firms were reporting that they were unable to fulfill 36% of their orders.
Wow.
And if that's true, I mean, I'm always suspicious about surveys that come up with these magical figures. But even if it was 10%, that's a huge difference to the economy. And, my background is slightly different to John's. Mine's an economist. I'm always thinking about how do we create wealth? Because if we don't create wealth, we can't share it. We can't help everybody. And there we are, we're sitting on wealth that is untapped. If we could deliver those 10% or 36% of orders, there'd be a lot of money coming in, and a lot of resources capable of being developed. And it's a frustration to me to see that blocked. And I think the mentality and the psychology of people is a big part of that. It isn't about systems.
Yeah. And I think that when we look at what the challenges at the minute, you talked about the unfulfilled orders, if you look at the major challenges SMEs and other businesses are having, so how do I keep and retain talent? The psychological contract is fundamentally changed now between employers and employees. Employees are looking for that bespoke, personal relationship. They're not willing to be just a number. The increasing understanding and awareness of psychology in the masses, because every kid coming out of A levels at the minute wants to do psychology pretty much. I've never known, there's so many psychology places at university. The information spread because of social media, and some of it's pop psychology and it's not well grounded, but we're changing. There is a greater understanding of what's driving and motivates people, and people want that personal touch. So as you said a minute ago, Doug, leadership isn't something you do to somebody. It's that journey that you take them on. And I think that's that real challenge is how do we as leaders, how do leaders of the future embrace the changing psychological contract and make it really tailored for the individual. And companies that try and do it by number are going to struggle. And I think that lies at the heart of what I'm seeing as the real challenge.
I'm always really interested in that sense of, like people losing talent because people are different and people want different things. And so I always come at it from a sport point of view, kind of telling people that if you have what people class as a tough environment in sport, you actually end up just selecting the tough ones rather than developing it, which means you've got loads of really sensitive, talented people, and you lose out on that talent. So I see it in sport quite a lot. In the industries you work in, do you get a sense that there's this sort of chunk of talented, sensitive individuals who maybe with better support can be kept?
Yeah, absolutely. It tends to be, again, generalizations, don't we have to be careful, but it tends to be where there are quite high levels of mental toughness without that awareness in some of the senior leadership that just create that culture. And there are people that are more mentally sensitive that have a lot to offer. They just don't get heard, don't get seen, and it's not the right culture for them. And you'll be amazed how often you kind of see that. I remember a number of years ago, and it wasn't with the MTQ sadly, but I did a profile of our senior management team using 16 personalities actually, and out of the 8, 7 of them had the same personality profile.
Wow.
The same narrow, and you just think you've just hired in your likeness. So no wonder there's no diversity of thought. No wonder one of your challenges is groupthink. No wonder you're saying that the people below you don't resonate with you, because you've just created this groupthink of people all the same thing, exactly the same way. No wonder. So it's I think it's a real challenge.
Yeah, a group of mini-me's, right?
Absolutely, a group of little mini-me's, no wondering why they were struggling.
That takes you just think that's someone who quite likes themselves, isn't it? You end up going like, I'm drawn to all these people. I don't know what it is. Yes. Oh yeah, that's it. They're just like me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's human nature, isn't it? We like people like us, but it's how do we raise that self-awareness? And that's why I love the MTQ, because it doesn't label people like some of the others. You're not a color or an acronym or a letter with 40,000 or more different variations on that. It's more about showing people sort of where they are and how they can think differently, rather than putting them in a box and going, you're a this or you're a that. And I just think I go back to that self-awareness piece. When you've got that self-awareness, it's absolutely everything. Using a metaphor for me, high levels of mental toughness without self-awareness reminds me of the kind of Pirelli adverts. You remember going back, power is nothing without control. Carl Lewis in a pair of high heels. Without the self-awareness, high levels of mental toughness can cause you as many problems. And it's how do we create that self-awareness so that everybody thinks a bit differently? And you need that spread within a team. Having everybody one way or the other, one end of the spectrum or the other, could be problematic.
Brilliant. I think that's a great point on which to finish, Anthony. It's been a great conversation. I have a little takeaway, and it might surprise you. Right at the beginning of the conversation, you used a little phrase that I know a lot of people say, oh, that's not right. And you spoke about working with a team of 200. I know loads of team working consultants who say a team should be 6 to 12 people. Anything bigger than that is a group, and they go down blind alleys. If you have 200 people in an organization, you want them all facing the same way and cooperating and supporting each other. That's a team. And I like the idea that you talk about a team of 200.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, definitely. I think for me, there are different definitions of team, aren't there? But everyone's got to be going in that same direction. There can be sub-elements to that, but if they're all heading in the right direction, then surely they're a team.
Yeah. the one team. That's a big issue. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome. I've
That's been
enjoyed it.
great.
Thank you.